As the sun began to set, fear gripped Kosi. She realized that her own auntie Irima had deceived her and taken her away. Desperately, she looked around the room for an escape route but found none. The room felt like a trap, with old decayed pots piled up against each other, blocking every way out. Kosi's heart pounded as she struggled to think of a way to escape. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the door. Erima's face paled with fear. She grabbed Kosi roughly by the arm and dragged her to a hidden door at the back of the room. Come with me, she hissed, pulling Kosi into a narrow passageway that led to a store. Erima, a voice called from outside. Open the door! It's me, Ozioma! Erima sighed in relief and let go of Kosi. Stay here and don't move, she commanded, her voice shaky. She walked briskly to the door, her heart pounding. Kosi followed her quietly, her eyes moving around for possible escape routes. Erima opened the door slightly, peering out. Ozioma, what are you doing here? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. I heard noises. Are you okay? Ozioma asked, concern in her voice. Yes, everything's fine. Come in quickly, Erima replied, opening the door wider. As Ozioma stepped inside, Kosi's heart raced. She saw a small window at the back of the store and inched towards it, hoping for a chance to escape. Kosi, sit down, Erima begged, her eyes flashing with anger. Kosi froze, her hope fading as she sat down, still watching the window. Ozioma glanced around the room, sensing something was off. Erima, what's going on here? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Nothing you need to worry about, Erima replied quickly, forcing a smile. Just some old pots making noise. Kosi's heart pounded in her chest as she prayed for a way out. She moved into the room. What is this beautiful baby doing in your room? She asked, pointing towards Kosi. Don't tell me you now steal children too, she added jokingly. Stop that, Erima snapped angrily. This is the daughter of my cousin Nnamdi, the one I stayed with in the city who treated me like that. Now, I will ensure they never see their daughter again, she said, her voice a mix of anger and sarcasm. Ozioma's eyes widened in shock. Erima, what are you talking about? Erima's face twisted into a cruel smile. I'm going to sell her to Mama Bisi. You know she sells children for money. She'll make a fortune from Kosi and she'll compensate me very well. At least this way, I gain something from my suffering, she said, looking at Kosi with a glint of malice in her eyes. Nnamdi Anojugu will suffer just like I did, she laughed bitterly. Uzoma stared back, horrified. Erima, this is madness! You can't do this to a child! Watch me, Erima retorted, her laughter filled with anger. This is my revenge, and nothing will stop me. Kosi's heart raced as she listened to the exchange, her eyes moving around the room, desperately searching for an escape. She knew she was in deep trouble and had to act quickly. Auntie River, Kosi called out, her voice trembling. But why? Why do you take me away? Why do you want to sell me off? She cried, her small body shaking. I'm only a child. I didn't do anything to you. Please. Shut up, child, Irima screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. Keep quiet. You don't know. You don't know, she muttered, tears welling up in her eyes. Your father knows why. He knows. Kosi looked at her. wide-eyed. "What do you mean, Auntie Erima? What happened?" Erima took a deep breath, her voice filled with bitterness. "When I was just a kid, barely 6 years old, my father and your grandfather were very close brothers. My father used to be the village treasurer," she began, her voice cold. "At that time, there was a community project and my father was in charge of the funds. Your father, Uncle Nnamdi, became gravely ill. Then your grandfather came to my father desperate and asked to borrow money for his son's treatment. He promised he would pay it back. My father didn't have any personal funds, but your grandfather suggested he use some of the community's money." Kosi listened, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. My father, seeing his brother in distress and not wanting his nephew to die, gave him the money he needed. Erima continued, her voice trembling. But when the community project started and my father needed the money back, your grandfather refused to repay him. The next thing we heard was that my father stole community funds and embezzled the community's money. And to make matters worse, it was your grandfather that started the rumors. Erima's eyes blazed with anger as she continued. The villagers were furious. They beat my father up and disgraced him in the village square, calling him all sorts of names. The shock and injury from the beating were so severe that he got very sick. Not long after, he died with that shame hanging over him. Tears rolled down Erima's cheeks as she spoke. It was only after his death that your grandfather confessed to my mother that he had taken the money for his son's illness. My mother was bitter and sought revenge. That was why she didn't hesitate to send me to your house when the opportunity came. My mission was to cause havoc. Kosi stared at her, horrified. But my parents, they didn't know all this. Erima shook her head, laughing bitterly. They knew what they had done. They thought they can escape their guilt by sending me away. But they can't escape now. I will make sure they suffer, just like my father did, she said, her voice filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. With tears streaming down Kosi's face, she pleaded with Auntie Erima. Auntie Erima, please don't do this. My parents never told me any of this. I promise we will be fine. We will find a way. Please don't hurt me. Erima looked at Kosi, her expression conflicted. For a moment, it seemed like she might soften, but then her face hardened. It's too late for that, Kosi. Your parents will pay for what they've done, she said, her voice cold and final. Ozioma watched her friend closely, her heart pounding. She had never ever seen Erima like this, but she knew her well enough to realize that Erima would follow through on her threats. Please, Erima, don't do anything to this child, Ozioma pleaded, her voice trembling. She has no hand in any of these things you're talking about. But Erima was adamant, her face a mask of cold determination. Leave my house, Ozioma, she screamed angrily. And if I hear a word of anything I told you tonight outside, I will kill you. Her voice was filled with chilling menace. Ozioma looked at Kosi, her heart breaking for the frightened girl. I'll leave, but please think about what you're doing, oh, she said softly, before turning and walking out, her mind racing with thoughts of how to help Kosi. Meanwhile, Nnamdi and Ojugo had gone to several places that night in search of Kosi. They had informed the village local authorities, who promised to set up the village local vigilante to search for Kosi. Back at the house, Erima turned to Kosi, her face hardening. Lie down on the floor, she shouted. This will be your bed tonight, she said, pointing at a dusty corner in the room. Tomorrow morning, we'll decide your fate. That night, Kosi couldn't sleep. Her mind roamed around on possible ways to get her parents to know where she was. She knew they must be worried sick by now. She hoped and prayed they would find her before her auntie sells her off to an unknown life of darkness. It was a very long night, and as much as Kosi tried to close her eyes, she couldn't. The thoughts of what will happen the next morning kept her awake. Early the next morning, Irima walked into the store where Kosi laid. "I'm going now," she said, grabbing a rope. She tied Kosi's hands and legs tightly. "If you try to escape, remember there's no house close by, so no one will help you," she warned, her voice dripping with malice. Kosi's eyes filled with tears as she watched Irima leave tied hands and legs, the door slamming shut behind her. The room grew silent, the only sound being Kosi's quiet sobs. She looked around desperately, trying to think of a way to free herself. Hours seemed to pass as Kosi struggled against the ropes. Her wrists became sore and her hope waned. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a faint noise coming from outside. She froze, straining to hear. It was a whisper, then a soft knock on the door. "Kosi! Kosi! It's me, Uzioma!" The voice whispered urgently. "Are you okay?" Kosi's heart leaped with relief. "Auntie Uzoma, please help me!" she whispered back, tears streaming down her face. The door creaked open and Uzioma slipped inside. She quickly untied Kosi's bonds and her hands trembling. "We need to move quickly," she whispered. "Irima won't be gone for long." As they quietly made their way out of the house, Uzioma kept a watchful eye. They had just reached the edge of the village when they heard footsteps behind them. Irima was back and she was furious. "Where do you think you're going?" Irima shouted, her voice filled with rage. She started running towards them, but Uzioma stood her ground, shielding Kosi. "Run, Kosi! Run to the village square!" Uzioma yelled, pushing Kosi forward. Kosi ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. Irima longed at Uzioma, but the villagers, alerted by the shouts and commotion, quickly gathered around. Namdi and Ojugu were quickly alerted by the village authorities, and they rushed to the scene. "Irima! Irima, stop!" Namdi shouted, his voice filled with authority. "What are you doing?" Irima, seeing the crowd and realizing she could no longer escape, she dropped to her knees, her anger giving way to despair. "They need to pay for what they've done to my family," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Nnamdi and Ojugo clung to their daughter, tears of relief streaming down their faces. "Kosi! Thank God you're safe!" Ojugo sobbed, holding her tightly. Kosi hugged her parents back and took a deep breath. "Mommy, Daddy, I need to tell you something. Auntie Irima shared the story with me about why she did all this," she said. Irima, glaring intensely, cut in. "Yes, tell them! Tell them they ruined my family! Tell them!" As Kosi narrated the story of the embezzlement and how Irima's father died unjustly. The entire crowd gasped in awe. Nnamdi's face grew pale as he tried to process the weight of the information he had just received. Ojugo stepped forward, her face a mixture of shock and sorrow. "Nnamdi, is this true? Did you really wrong her family? I knew my father borrowed money from her father a long time ago, but I never knew he lied against his brother," he cried. "I didn't know how much it hurt them. I was still a child." Irima's eyes blazed with vengeance and satisfaction. "Now you will know how it can be to go in for something you know nothing about," she said. Kosi, still holding her parents' hands, looked at Irima with compassion. "Auntie Irima, I'm sorry for what happened, but hurting others won't make it better. You could have talked to somebody." Irima's expression softened briefly. before hardening again. You don't understand, child. It was never just about the money. It was about self-respect, dignity, revenge. The village elder stepped forward, his voice calm and authoritative. Erima, enough! The past can't be changed by holding on to hatred. We must find a way to heal. Erima's shoulders slumped as the weight of her actions settled in. The crowd, now silent, watched intently. Nnamdi and Ojugo addressed them, their voice shaking. We are deeply sorry for the pain we caused. We never intended for anyone to suffer. We hope to make amends and end this cycle of hurt. As Erima was led away, Kosi squeezed her parents' hands. We should help each other heal. We should not let this thing happen again, she said. The crowd dispersed, murmurs of hope and reconciliation spreading through the village. Nnamdi, Ojugo and Kosi stood together, their hearts heavy with hopeful determination to face the future again. Indeed, they had learned a lot of lessons from the Iwakwa festival. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell for more interesting stories like this. Thank you for watching. Bye.